the biggest edifying thing for me was she said that she could finally be like a present mom in her kid's life because she could finally function
Oh,
again. And that, yeah, that
so
just really
heartwarming.
gets you. And she's not the only one. I've got a lot of
Mhm.
other people that it most people tell me it helps with the brain fog, it helps with fatigue, it helps restore some of that functionality in life. Like it makes the
Yeah.
symptoms better enough that they can function, they can get out of bed, they can spend time with the kids and the family, they can work, they can pursue some of their passions in life.
Welcome back, my listeners, to the Menopause Disruptor podcast. If you are new, welcome. This is a platform where we challenge conventional wisdom and bring you groundbreaking conversations about women's health. I'm your host, Mary Lee. Delighted to have you here. If you're a return listener, thank you. Thank you for continuing to tune in. And if you've been enjoying these episodes, remember to share. There's always someone who can benefit from knowledge from these wise guests that I bring each week. And this week is no exception. Today's episode is particularly special as we welcome Dr. Keith Ellis, whose work has fascinating implications for women navigating menopause. Dr. Ellis was actually inspired to join us after listening to a previous conversation I had with Dr. Jenny Tafinkian about viral reactivation during menopause, a topic that perfectly aligns with his extensive research on long COVID. Dr. Ellis has built an impressive community of 5,000 individuals affected by long COVID, all of whom have been engaged extensively in his groundbreaking research. His work in developing science-driven supplements and understanding the biological mechanism of long COVID has opened new doors in understanding how viral reactivation affects both long COVID patients and women in menopause. For our listeners who've been following this series on long COVID and chronic fatigue, as well as hormonal changes, today's conversation promises to bridge some crucial gaps in our understanding. We'll explore the fascinating intersection between menopause symptoms, viral reactivation, and long COVID, offering insights that could be transformative to your health journey. But before we begin, here's something you need to know about Keith Ellis. Dr. Ellis has a PhD in medicinal chemistry, and he's also an associate professor, entrepreneur, and a founder. As a scientist, he is dedicating his time, energy, and talents to helping people recover from long COVID. Dr. Ellis is using his knowledge, expertise, and experience in medicinal chemistry, pharmacology, and natural products to research the biological mechanism that can cause long COVID and the potential therapeutic mechanism that can help people recover. Combining this scientific work with his interest in entrepreneurship, Dr. Ellis has designed and brought to market a custom formulated natural product supplement to help people recover. In 2023, Dr. Ellis founded Science Driven Supplements and launched its first product, CircuGuard, a natural herbal supplement to help people recover from long COVID microclots. Dr. Ellis and Science Driven Supplements are committed to creating custom formulated solutions for people with long COVID that are safe, inexpensive, and accessible for everyone without a doctor's prescription and available right now. And I'll put that link in the show notes. In parallel with his long COVID research and work as founder of Science Driven Supplements, Dr. Ellis serves as the Associate Professor of Medicinal Chemistry at Virginia Commonwealth University, conducting academic research and early lead discovery in the oncology field and teaching organic and medicinal chemistry to graduate students, professional students, and undergraduates. Dr. Ellis has published academic scholarly work in world-class scientific journals, including the Journal of Natural Products, ACS Medicinal Chemistry Letters, ACS Chemical Biology, Molecular Pharmacology, Bioorganic and Medicinal Chemistry, and Cancer Biology and Therapy. Join me in welcoming Dr. Ellis. I am excited to introduce Dr. Ellis on the Menopause Disruptor podcast. Dr. Ellis, you shared with me that it was from listening to a conversation that I had with Dr.
Mhm.
Jenny Tafinkian that you were inspired by her insights regarding the potential reactivation of childhood viruses during menopause. And it was
Mhm.
through that discussion, that episode, that really resonated with your ongoing work related to long COVID,
Mhm.
especially given the intricate connections between these health issues, which we'll dive into a lot more. And with your expertise and experiences, I feel that you're going to bring valuable insight and perspective to my audience. So, Dr. Ellis, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
I noticed on your intake form that your favorite book is Simon Sinek's
Mhm.
Start With Why. So let's start there. Can you
Yes.
share with us
Yes.
your why and your interest in medicinal chemistry?
Oh, goodness, we're going to go there already. Okay. So, as you go through life, you go through different phases, you read different books. And Simon Sinek's book, Start With Why, really hit me at a particular time where I was in a little bit of a transition. It was actually in the early period where I was starting that long COVID work. It was a fortuitous time because it really challenged me to think about why I had always done the things I had done in my career, become an academic, get a PhD, become a professor, and what was my why going forward from where I was at. Because I happened to read his book after I got tenure, so already established. So I ended up going into kind of medicinal chemistry. I was always a pretty scholarly kid. I was the good student. I was the bookworm.
Mhm.
Chemistry is a lot of people you say chemistry, particularly say organic chemistry, and they like shudder, right? Because most people don't have good experiences with those fields. And I get it because
Okay.
everyone has a bad experience, even the people that do it, because it's hard, right? But it's one of those things that always just it made sense to me. I like to tell the students I teach now that I can actually see molecules in my head and rotate them in three dimensions. And in my mental space, chemistry just makes a lot of sense. And that's really what drove me into chemistry. My PhD is in organic chemistry, actually, and then I did my postdoc training in medicinal chemistry. And medicinal chemistry is the academic discipline that teaches drug discovery. It's how to actually
Mm.
take the chemistry know how to build molecules to design molecules that are actually going to have specific biological activities in the body and then build those and optimize those into drugs. And that always appealed to my problem solving kind of interest. At the time that I read Start With Why, I finally realized after a long time of never really realizing it through my whole life, my why, and especially now at this point, is to help people be free.
Mm.
And to be free, you have to be healthy. Losing your health, you're not free when you're sick, when you're struggling with your health, when you have ailments. And that's
Mhm.
really, I think, what drew me to medicinal chemistry and being interested in developing therapeutics and now looking at natural remedies, which are old but new again, especially for me in my career. But it's that desire to really help people help themselves to be healthy and to help them be free to live the life that they want to have.
That's so beautiful. So why long COVID? Why your dedicated research and
Mhm.
entrepreneurial efforts?
I have an academic lab that I do what I consider early lead discovery. I mainly worked early in my career, right when I started my independent career about 15, 16 years ago. I worked a little bit on antibacterials and I shifted mainly to working in oncology. And I, my interest is to do things that are new and different. And I like working on new, what we call molecular targets. So a new protein that's been discovered to be important and have a role in diseases and look like it has a place in trying to be targeted with a drug. I like
Well,
picking those up early and finding the early molecules, what we would call hits, to try to modulate biological activity in that certain way where the chemistry and the biology interface and really meet each other. That's what interests me and where I like to work. So I've done that for a long time. So in early 2023, it had been a while. We were 3 years into the pandemic
mhm.
and COVID, acute COVID, of course, had been around for all those years. And long COVID was really starting to emerge as a real problem that there didn't seem to be any solution for, right? When we look at COVID, we know antivirals roughly, like we know how to develop them for various viral diseases. And by 2023, we pretty much had a handle on acute COVID infections, but long COVID was this more nebulous, unknown. There wasn't really anything to help people. So it was that point that I went into the scientific literature. I said, okay, well, I'm going to go do my normal thing. I went to the scientific literature the way I would normally do so for an oncology project and said, okay,
Okay.
let me look at the mechanisms that are causing the disease. Let me
Okay.
look for some molecular targets, and let's get started trying to find new drugs to help people. Because one of the things that people don't like to talk about is the timeline to discover and develop a new pharmaceutical drug is very long. The
Mm-hmm.
accepted timeline's about 10 to 15 years to
Mm-hmm.
develop a completely new drug against a new molecular target. So delaying starting that work just delays the starting the clock on that 10 to 15 years. And I wanted to try and get into literature and start trying to develop new therapeutics for long COVID. And then I got into the literature, and that's when things went an unexpected direction, and they took a less traveled road than I've ever taken in my career. And that's what kind of ended up going more in the natural remedy direction and the entrepreneurial direction. And again, the underlying theme in that was trying to help people
Of
help
course.
themselves and give them tools that they were free to try without anybody in the medical community or the scientific establishment having to say about it.
Wow. Okay, so just for the listeners, explain what is the difference between long COVID and the acute COVID so that they have a better understanding.
Sure. So acute COVID is what everybody got in early 2020 who got COVID. And like
Mm-hmm.
I got Omicron and it was January of 2022. So
Mm-hmm.
the acute COVID infection is when you first get the virus, you get that really high fever,
Mm-hmm.
typically. You get cold and flu-like symptoms. There's usually upper respiratory congestion. A lot of people get a
Mm-hmm.
cough, the absolute crushing fatigue, like not being able to get out of bed and be functional at all. Like you're sick like a very, very severe flu or cold.
Mm-hmm.
And usually there's a fever, but usually a lot of times a high fever associated with that. So that's the acute COVID infection. That's when you catch COVID, right?
Right.
So most people, most of the time, recover from that, and just like they would from the cold or the flu, and they go back to normal life. Now, a certain percentage of people, a certain percentage of the time, they get maybe mostly better. Maybe they'll get 80% better, but they don't totally recover. And that in COVID lingers with them. And typically with long COVID, it's people who are still sick after 3 to 6 months post acute infection. So you get an acute COVID infection, you mostly recover, but you've got lingering symptoms for 3 to 6 months beyond when you got the original acute infection. And typically what happens is people do get better, but then they keep some symptoms, and then when they transition into having long COVID, they acquire new symptoms and they get sicker after several months post having an acute COVID infection. And that's what's characterized by long COVID. And then there's a kind of a constellation of symptoms associated with long COVID that are how it's typically diagnosed.
Okay, so some of the symptoms being things like extreme
Um,
fatigue.
Yep. So when I think about long COVID, there seem to be like core symptoms that everyone seems to get. And
Okay.
then there's this broader constellation of symptoms where they're known to occur in the long COVID patient population, but not everybody gets them. It's like long COVID presents differently in different people.
Mm-hmm.
So the core symptoms seem to be fatigue, just a strong fatigue, not just a little bit tired, but really that bone crushing fatigue, weakness, brain fog, or lack of mental clarity that people refer to. A lot of people will have some kind of cardiac symptom, especially shortness of breath, maybe with light exertion, right? Where you get short of breath much quicker than you really think you could. Exertion becomes a real issue because of the shortness of breath and the fatigue. Those are the core symptoms. And then when you go out beyond those, there's a whole constellation of symptoms that hit a bunch of different physiological symptoms in the body. So there can be more severe cardiac symptoms. People can
Okay.
get dizziness, they can get tachycardia, or rapid heartbeat, or skipped heartbeats. They can get the dizziness. It sometimes manifests as what's called POTS, and that's postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome, where basically standing up, you can't maintain your heart rate. You start getting tachycardia. It can
Wow.
be things, the fatigue it can also be accompanied with what's called post-exertional malaise or PEM, where you go and do something for an hour and you crash afterwards, and it takes you multiple hours to recover after that. The amount of time you need to recover is much larger and disproportional to the exertion that you expended, right? That's called post-exertional malaise. There can be headaches that accompany the brain fog and other neurological symptoms. Also, anxiety and depression occur in long COVID. And there's a little bit of a chicken and the egg kind of issue with that of,
Mm.
are those because people are not feeling well, or are they actually really chemical physiological symptoms that are caused by the disease, and then it's just piling symptoms on top of the other long COVID
Interesting.
symptoms. There's usually an inflammation component.
Hmm.
One of the theories of what causes long COVID is that there's inflammation in the lining of the blood vessels, right? So you get inflammation in the circulatory system, which can then populate into other systems of the body. A lot of people hypothesize that some of the neurological symptoms are caused by neuroinflammation. So that's cardiac, that's circulatory, again, more of the respiratory type issues. There's often an immune response component. So some people will become very sensitive immunologically to the point where they'll develop what's called MCAS, or mast cell activation syndrome, where the slightest little things will cause this inflammation and flare up of the immune system, almost like an autoimmune disease. You can get involvement of the GI tract. A lot of people have severe gut
Yeah.
dysbiosis and leaky gut.
Mhm.
There's, again, mechanistically, people think that's caused by potentially viral reservoirs in the lining of the GI tract. There's joint and muscle pain, neuropathy, what people will call dysautonomia, or dysregulation of the autonomic nervous system, and that can account for a lot of the shortness of breath and heart rate issues. But also, like the pins and needles neuropathy is also associated with dysautonomia. So there's a whole host of symptoms, what I think of as this constellation, that crossed traditional physiological systems, which is why the physicians have such a hard time diagnosing it and dealing with it, because modern medicine, the practice of modern medicine, is divided into physiological symptoms. So that's one of the things that make it harder for doctors and for the physicians to really deal with long COVID. And despite all of this going on, typically when you do blood work on somebody with long COVID, they look normal. There's not
Ah,
a lot of stuff that's off in the blood work. There's no diagnostic clinical test you can do for long COVID. So these people
okay.
go to the doctor, they're sick, some of them horribly, severely sick, and the doctor's looking at them and it's like, well, there's nothing really wrong with you that I can see, which is what leads to a lot of frustration in the long COVID community.
Interesting. It was because I had another bout with what felt like, well, it was COVID. I tested positive. It was back in the spring and it just lingered. Fortunately, maybe about a month. And that was what prompted me to look into long COVID and the intersection between long COVID and menopause symptoms, because many people that were suffering long COVID, and this is what the research had said, were around that 45, 55,
Mhm.
which aligns exactly with your menopause years. And so it was more complicated uh, because on the one hand, you have these array of symptoms, constellation of symptoms, as you said, and many of them are exactly what we experience in
Yeah.
menopause: the brain fog, the extreme fatigue, just a general overall feeling not like yourself, and the sluggishness and
Mhm.
the joint pain, the GI tract issues because the gut microbiome shifts so much during
Yep.
menopause. And so you might on the one hand go in and the doctor might dismiss your menopause symptoms for long
Mhm.
COVID, or dismiss long COVID thinking
Mhm.
it's just a change of life and go home and
Yep.
or maybe take some SSRIs or get better sleep. And again,
Yes. Yes.
throwing just a generalization at the patient
and
Mhm.
we're dumbfounded. And that's what prompted my interest to look into this
Mhm.
and explore it a little bit deeper. And it is fascinating, not necessarily advocating for menopause hormone therapy, but the research did explain how estrogen as anti-inflammatory properties,
Mhm.
immunomodulatory properties, and neuroprotective properties, when it's gone, that inflammation, as you spoke of, heightens in the body. We have more inflammation. As a result, we have more symptoms. So it was interesting to see how estrogen could play a role helping women through the menopause, but also deal with long COVID symptoms at the same time. But that's just one case, one demographic,
Yeah. Well,
females.
but that's a that's the predominant demographic for long COVID, right? So when you look
Okay.
at long COVID, what I'm seeing, and again, there's not a ton of formal large studies out yet, but what you really see when you look at the patient population is it tends to be 30 to 65 year olds.
Okay.
So but you figure that's probably at least a little bit of a bell curve, but
Mhm.
it does more and more research on long COVID in kids, and it does hit kids, but the predominant patient population is really more of that 30 entering midlife through 65 and beginning to age out of midlife. It also predominantly hits females, right? It's the long COVID population that I've seen is about 70% women. It's predominantly it's really askew towards the female side, which again
Okay.
talks about some of the issues you're talking about with estrogen, but not only with estrogen, but with other hormone systems like cortisol and everything else. I think it's interesting because your podcast was the first time I'd heard anybody talk about that in the context of long COVID. I haven't seen a ton of research out
Mhm.
there around the hormone space in how that really impacts long COVID. But it makes sense that's a huge area that would be effective for multiple reasons. Because the two patient populations that I always mention, because they seem to be like an uptick above the background you'd expect to see, it is endurance athletes. There's a
Okay.
there's a disproportionately large portion of people with long COVID that were like super healthy and fit before they got it. And it seems to be that that type of training puts stress on the body, puts stress on the energetic system, puts
Yeah.
stress
Makes
on the
sense.
immune system, and it's almost
Makes
like it
sense.
made them more susceptible for long COVID. The other kind of overrepresented subpopulation is, and again, this is highly represented by women, is people with some kind of immune condition beforehand, especially autoimmune diseases, right?
Yeah.
Because it's like that dysfunction of the immune system made them more susceptible or more vulnerable to what's going on with long COVID at the molecular level that's causing long COVID. And it's an interesting research idea, and I think one that people really need to look at of what are
Absolutely.
hormonal changes and the molecular level impacts of hormone cycling and changes in hormone levels as you go through menopause. Is that part of what makes women disproportionately more vulnerable to long COVID?
That's fantastic. That is fascinating. And what comes to mind right away with my limited experience about the gut microbiome, but from
Mhm.
what I have seen and understanding menopause and cortisol, it seems as though those with athletes, they have spiked cortisol levels because of the stress they put on their body for the extreme
Yes.
training. And cortisol feeds all the bad bacteria in our gut.
Mhm.
It just, the more cortisol levels we have, the more susceptible to inflammation, the more susceptible to leaky gut because the
Yep.
gut lining is weakened, and a whole host of other conditions that are associated with high cortisol levels. And then you add on to the fact that as women go into the menopause years, their gut microbiome is already going to shift because we're at a homeostasis and the body's
Yeah.
fighting to find that new balance. We don't have our estrogen receptors and the cells for estrogen, they're not getting those messages. Body is fighting, so it's naturally going to spike the cortisol levels.
Yep.
So
No,
as research marches on, I think there's a whole interesting field that might already be out there about, because we already understand that the gut microbiome is 80% our immune cells are found in the GI tract.
well, and this is of circling back to what I did and what I found in the literature. I haven't seen a whole lot about hormone levels in long COVID. It wouldn't surprise me if it's actually not in the literature yet. And this is kind of part of the frustrating, shocking, infuriating kind of thing with the scientific literature right now. There's a ton of work being done on COVID and long COVID, and all of it is great scientific work. There's a ton of publications being released. There's a ton of grant money going out. What I find frustrating from my kind of share in the scientific ecosystem, right? I depend on the biology guys and the pharmacologists, the physiology guys to come up with all those molecular mechanisms, really flesh things out, and then I could take that and start making drugs. And what I found when I started working on long COVID is much of the data that I needed to do what I needed to do wasn't in the literature, and it still isn't.
Yes.
Because the work that's going on, despite the volume of work being done, it's very unfocused. And everybody, and this is just the natural process of science, and I get it. Everybody's researching what they research in the context of long COVID and not really focusing any efforts to try to piece together the picture faster, more efficiently, and in a way that where people can get with long COVID can get help sooner rather than later. And that was one of the really shocking and disappointing things I found when I went into scientific literature is as a collective science, right? It's like we're doing things the way we normally do them. We're doing them with a high degree of sophistication. We're doing them with really high standards, but we're also doing it the old slow way. Like we're just letting the science go at the pace that it normally goes. And it's unfortunate because there's a lot of people out there with long COVID. The numbers for long COVID are shocking when you read the publications of how many people suffer from long COVID and what the risk statistics are for getting long COVID. It's like, why are we not moving faster? And that's a lot of the reason that I went down this different road than doing an academic project that I normally would have done.
Interesting. One area I want to take this is the idea that there's risk factors associated with long COVID. Now we're talking like fatalities. What exactly is happening when a patient goes unchecked?
So I think the sad reality is people are dying of long COVID. I don't think there's real accurate tracking of that and what's going on. But when you talk to the long COVID patients and you talk to the community, there are definitely people are getting to the point where their body's just giving it from long COVID, or they have long COVID and something else, they develop something else. The numbers for long COVID are really shocking. There was a study published in, I think it was Nature Medicine recently. As of the end of 2023, the long COVID incident rate worldwide, there were 410 million people that had long COVID.
Wow.
Cumulative from the beginning of the pandemic till the end of 2023. But 400 million cases of long COVID worldwide. That's a lot of people.
That is big numbers that the science world
and keep
needs
in
to be paying
mind,
attention to.
That's like a new disease, right? You say what you want about COVID-19. We knew about coronaviruses before the pandemic, right? And right, because they're related to bird flu and some other viral infections. There was a body of work there. We knew about them and about the clinical symptoms that coronaviruses in general cause. And obviously COVID-19 was its own unique virus experience for the world, right? That was new and different, but it wasn't completely unknown, right? Long COVID is really now this condition that this syndrome that occurs of these lingering post-COVID effects is completely new. as a disease state. In its own way, it is completely new. And people, the numbers seem to bear out. There's about a 1 in 10 chance of getting long COVID every time you get COVID. So that's a pretty high incidence
That is.
rate for people for something that we're not really working. I should say we're not working hard for something that we don't really have a lot of help for people immediately, like right now for the people that have it. So now I say long COVID is a new disease from a drug discovery scientist point of view. It really is a new disease, right? It's got a new molecular cause that we have to go in and figure out in order to do drug discovery. I will say, and this was in your podcast episode that I listened to, there are other similar syndromes that people are now clumping together and calling post-viral reactivation syndromes. And it's with long COVID, they're lumping in ME/CFS, chronic fatigue syndrome, West Nile, Lyme disease. There's increasing recognition that all of these are really these syndromes that occur with viral reactivation after an acute infection. And what I'm seeing is the top line symptoms are all very similar. If you look at, for instance, somebody with chronic fatigue syndrome and somebody with long COVID, symptom wise, they're presenting very similar, right? Okay. There's a lot of overlap of these symptoms, including the fatigue and the brain fog and everything else. When you drill down, though, as more of a molecular level scientist, I'm pretty confident saying, well, if different viruses are causing this viral reactivation syndrome at a molecular level, the exact molecular details will be different. They are going to be different, quote unquote, diseases. Could they have some kind of similar physiological mechanism where these viral proteins are all causing a similar thing to happen, and that's why the symptoms are similar? Sure, but the actual molecular level details of what exactly happens in the body will be different. And I think right now it's a coin toss as to, from a therapeutic point of view, whether that matters for developing treatments and drugs that help people. So I think that's a coin toss, because if they're all using a somewhat similar physiological mechanism, you might be able to address all of them with a intervention mechanism that treats that similar mechanism, even though the zoomed in molecular level details are a little bit different. So that's one of those things that's going to require a lot of research to figure out. But all of these are more chronic diseases. They have smaller patient populations. There's not a whole lot of interest in terms of pharmaceutical industry. There's not a whole lot of dedicated grant money going into them. Yeah. So the kind of efforts you would need to really tease out these effects and totally understand everything is going to take a long time at the pace that we're going.
Yes. Okay. A lot going on there. So good in how you've explained to us how reoccurring viruses, it reiterates what was spoken again with Dr. Jenny Tifinkian. But in terms of what you've been able to design and your formulation process, explain how you go from discovering these key biological mechanisms behind long COVID to finding a formulation, a supplement that can help those suffering from long COVID.
Okay, so I went into the literature, right? I was looking for molecular targets. I was thinking pharmaceutical, right? So, okay, did my thing, and insufficient data was basically what I came back with. Not enough data to do a normal academic drug discovery campaign, or even for big pharma for that matter. Okay, so just not enough data yet. So I took a step back and going with that whole Simon Sinek start with why thing, right? It was, well, what can I do right now that would actually help people? I went back to the literature and I asked just a different question from a different point of view. And that led me to review, okay, what is the most advanced mechanistic models that are out there for what's causing long COVID? And that's when I found the microclot hypothesis, which is a really nice hypothesis that a very good set of scientists have been working on and doing a lot of experiments, published a lot of papers and data on. And basically, in the microclot hypothesis, the idea is that the spike protein from the COVID virus
Okay.
is interacting with a normal clotting protein in our blood. And when binding occurs, it changes the conformation of the protein in our blood into an unnatural conformation of this clotting protein that causes it to polymerize and form these microclots.
Oh.
The molecular level process behind this is very similar to the way that proteins in the brain polymerize for people when they get Alzheimer's. So in Alzheimer's, the polymerization, they're called amyloid plaques of either tau protein or A beta, right? Everybody's familiar with that for Alzheimer's. And microclots are most accurately described as amyloids of fibrinogen, which is this protein in blood that forms clots. So basically, the spike protein from the virus in binding to fibrinogen, again, causes this unnatural change in conformation that allows amyloids to form. And that's what the microclots are. And the microclots are sticky. They bind to other things. They bind to red blood cells. They bind to platelets and activate platelets. They induce all the inflammation in the endothelial lining of the circulatory system.
Okay.
And one of the things so there were two things I really liked about the microclot hypothesis. The first was it actually was a unified hypothesis behind long COVID because all of the downstream symptoms you can actually explain from microclot hypothesis, which has its own attractiveness to it when you're looking at really the origins of the causation in terms of a molecular mechanism for a disease state. That's really attractive, right? But the other thing I really liked about it was there was really good molecular data that the microclot scientists have published on microclots. They took spike protein they made in the lab, they added it to a blood sample, and lo and behold, microclots formed. And they were able to visualize these because they came up with a laboratory-based test that uses a fluorescent dye and a fluorescence microscope to be able to actually visualize and see microclots. So they showed they could form it by adding a spike protein plus blood samples gave you microclots. And then they went and got long COVID patient blood samples and measured microclots in long COVID patients. So that's the kind of molecular level science that I was looking for, right, to start doing drug discovery. It's okay. So that leads you to, all right, we've got microclot hypothesis. Let's accept it. Let's say microclots cause long COVID. What can we do about microclots? So the microclot scientists that were working on this theory, they actually did do the next step. And they did a small trial with some human patients. And they used something called triple anticoagulant therapy. It's a cocktail of 3 pharmaceutical drugs, okay, that they gave this small study. It was like 90 patients. They all had long COVID. They used diagnostic clinical criteria to confirm everybody had long COVID. Then they actually measured their blood samples for microclots. They all had microclots. And then they gave them this pharmaceutical triple anticoagulant therapy. And at the end of the study, about 80% of the patients recovered from long COVID, including they reran the microclot assay on the people that recovered and their microclots were gone. So I'm like, okay, this is great. Well, people with long COVID have an option now. So I was talking to people, the long COVID audience that I was building. I was publishing a Substack on all the kind of research I was doing and review of the literature. And I was like, why aren't you guys all going and getting triple anticoagulant therapy? Like, this is a solved problem. Like, what's the issue here, right? And there's really 3 issues with triple anticoagulant therapy. The first is it's got 3 anticoagulants in it. And there's a significant side effect of risk of bleeding, right? Because you're on 3 anticoagulants, right? So that's actually, and the pharmaceutical anticoagulants are pretty powerful. Typically, you're not taking more than 1 at a time, and this is using 3. So the risk of bleeding as a side effect is significant. It's not something that you can just put aside. I think that kind of plays into why maybe physicians are reluctant to prescribe it, which was actually the second issue that patients I would talk to, like, well, we can't get it. Nobody will prescribe it. the private long COVID clinics that were popping up, that had popped up around the country, a lot of them are getting set up to do the assay to test people's blood for microclots. It's more of a research lab assay. It's not a clinical assay. It's not high throughput. It's got to be done with specialized equipment and everything. So these private pay clinics are getting set up to test people for microclots, and they will prescribe triple anticoagulant therapy. But for the most part, they're all private pay, they're expensive, and there's a long waiting list. So there's really not, aside from the safety issue with triple anticoagulant therapy, there was an accessibility issue of people just couldn't get their hands on it. And then third, there was a cost issue because it'd be an off-label prescription. Particularly one of the anticoagulants is expensive, right? And insurance companies aren't going to cover it because it's an off-label use, which again goes into the physicians don't want to prescribe it because there's a safety risk. There's no evidence-based reason to do it, right? There's no large randomized placebo-controlled clinical trial. That's what everybody wants to see before you do that. So I got all that information. I said, okay, well, now from my chair, if you accept microclots, hypothesis is correct, which looking at all the data, I'm pretty convinced that it's at least a good starting point, right? So you've got this pharmaceutical therapy that seems to work in a small study, but people can't really try it. And what you really needed was a safer, which means a little bit less potent version of triple anticoagulant therapy that people could get on their own, which means over the counter, and was inexpensive, right? If you could solve those three problems, then that would really help people. So that's what I decided to do. And this is where I drew on some training experience from earlier in my career from when I was a lot younger. So I actually did my PhD in natural product total synthesis as an organic chemist. So we were looking at natural products. We were looking at them as synthetic chemistry targets for how to make them. But we also always, behind that was always we were making them because there was some kind of biological activity. And my postdoc mentor in her lab, what I really learned was taking natural products as the starting point to discover drugs. And that's actually the way we used to do drug discovery for most of the 20th century. Was we started with a natural product or the mechanism that we understood from a natural product, and then designed the drug. So that's the process I grew up on, right? That's what I was taught young in the earlier days of my career. So I decided why don't we just do that, but let's flip the script, right? So I started with the pharmaceutical triple anticoagulant therapy cocktail. I said, well, let me reverse engineer this to natural ingredients using what we call mechanisms of action. How does the drug actually work? What's the molecular target? How does it work in vivo? Figure out molecular targets and mechanisms of action, and then figure out natural products that have the same ones, but are safer, a little less potent, and something that can be formulated over the counter. And that's actually how I formulated my product, CircuGuard, that is basically a natural version of triple anticoagulant therapy.
That is fascinating. Okay. So, did you know when you did your PhD that this would come back full circle?
No, and that's the interesting thing, because as I've gone through my career, what we've seen is pharmaceutical industry especially, but even now academic medicinal chemistry has moved away from natural products as the starting point for drugs. And this is the interesting thing for me about a lot of the trends now. Everybody wants to go back to more natural remedies. There's the Make America Healthy Again movement, but the interesting thing is science has moved away from it, and I don't think there's any interest in going back. We just don't discover drugs that way anymore. Natural products and natural ingredients are just no longer a part of the scientific process for drug discovery at this point, as it stands as a state-of-the-art science, both in academia and in big pharma. So, and I always knew, and I actually still teach in a natural products class that we make the pharmacy students take. And I use those lectures that I give kind of to advocate for, hey, this is the way it used to be done, and it worked for a long time. Now, are there more sophisticated things that we do now that are absolutely great and can do things that natural products can't? Absolutely. Part of the problem is we choose one thing over the other, and we let the other thing fall to the wayside, and we don't go
Yeah.
back to it. And people are ready to live healthier. They're ready to use more natural ingredients.
Yes.
And science is still in the process of accepting and observing that trend that people want. But at the end of the day, my goal was really to deliver a safe, accessible, and affordable product to people with long COVID that they could look at the research, which is why I published everything on Substack. It's all out there for people to read, that they could choose to try for their long COVID to see if it could help them recover and would be safe for them no matter what. And they would have the freedom to choose to do it without anybody else interfering.
So in order to get this product to the people,
Mhm.
you created a company.
Yep. So yeah, I created a company. I decided to call it Science Driven Supplements.
Okay.
My kind of longer term, grander vision would be to do this same process. Do it multiple times for long COVID. I do have other products that are in the design phase of thinking about rolling out to help people. One of them is for the gut dysbiosis that people experience in long COVID. So
Yes.
I'm trying to design more products specifically for long COVID, but more broadly, long term, I would love to use the same approach to try to create products to help people with a lot of these other diseases, be they chronic fatigue syndrome or Lyme or West Nile, or kind of some of these other either understudied, under-researched, underserved disease populations,
Yeah.
or also people, other natural remedies that look attractive for even other issues that they get more investment from pharmaceutical industry, like type 2 diabetes, things like menopause and those types of issues.
Tell us about the product CircuGuard, what's in
Mhm.
it, how does
Sure.
it get into the hands?
So I've got a bottle of it right here. If you're interested in looking at it and trying it, you can go to CircuGuard.com.
Okay.
That's the quick and easy way to get it. That's the quick order page. There's a link on there for the full product description that lays out all the ingredients and how they work and why. So in
Even
terms
better.
of the ingredients, it's very simple. I kept it very clean. At the time I was formulating it in my audience, I had a lot of people with MCAS issues, that mast cell activation. They wanted it like very clean, nothing in there that didn't have to be in there. So it has organic turmeric in it. That's got curcumin in it. That's an anticoagulant. It's got white willow bark extract, which is a natural form of aspirin, right? It's a COX-1 and 2 inhibitor. That's one of the components of triple anticoagulant therapy is aspirin. And then the third key ingredient, the real critical one, is called danshen extract. It's a natural product extract from traditional Chinese medicine.
Right.
It has compounds. It's got two natural products in it called sulfonolic acid A and B that are P2Y1, P2Y12 receptor antagonists, which the third ingredient in triple anticoagulant therapy is a drug called clopidogrel. That's its mechanism of action. So basically, there's a natural product, the turmeric, the white willow bark, and the danshen. Each have a mechanism of action that directly corresponds to one of the pharmaceutical drugs in triple anticoagulant therapy. It's got the natural version has black pepper extract in it to help with the turmeric bioavailability, to help it last longer in the body. And I threw in some beetroot extract because the worst symptom for most people with long COVID is fatigue. The hypothesis with the beetroot extract is it actually helps with tissue oxygenation and actual usage of oxygen from the red blood cells, which was going to help with the fatigue and help with the recovery as the microclots clear. So that's all that's in the formula. It's that in a veggie caps, very clean formulation for people to take and try for their long COVID.
And what kind of results are you getting?
So the people in my audience have been buying and taking it for several months now, and some of the stories are heartwarming. They're very encouraging to me, and people are really having good results in it. I had one person in my audience actually make her own series of TikTok videos about her recovery and just some of the phrasing she used. It's like she just put it up and published. I had no idea she was going to do it. And it's one of those, I hope people don't think I wrote it, right? Because it was that good. But she was basically saying it cleared the brain fog, it helped with fatigue. All of a sudden, she didn't need to nap. The most impactful statement she made that was really the biggest edifying thing for me was she said that she could finally be like a present mom in her kid's life because she could finally function
Oh,
again. And that, yeah, that
so
just really
heartwarming.
gets you. And she's not the only one. I've got a lot of other people that it most people tell me it helps with the brain fog, it helps with fatigue, it helps restore some of that functionality in life, right? It makes the
Yeah,
symptoms better enough that they can function, they can get out of bed, they can spend time with the kids and the family, they can work, they can pursue some of their passions in life. Is it a cure? Is it going to make them completely better? I think some people it is helping more than others. I think the more severe your long COVID is, the longer you have to take it for it to really work because it is a
right.
less
Okay.
potent than the pharmaceutical version. But in the clinical study they did with pharmaceutical triple anticoagulant therapy, they had people with kind of mild long COVID on it on the pharmaceutical cocktail for 2 to 4 months. People with severe long COVID were on it 4 to 6 months. That's a
Okay.
long time on that strong of a cocktail of anticoagulants. So I tell people typically to
Yeah.
expect to take it for 3 to 6 months. And it really does make people feel better. I've had some people tell me it's even helped with their dysautonomia, which was an effect kind of a level beyond what I was expecting, that it's helping some of those more systemic and peripheral issues, that it's helping with the dysautonomia as well as the more immediate help with the brain fog and the fatigue and some of the cardiac symptoms.
So explain dysautonomia.
So with dysautonomia, it's the autonomic nervous system that controls your heart rate, your
Right.
breathing.
Got that.
So some of the difficulty standing, some of the lightness of head, some of that, but also associated with dysautonomia is sometimes the peripheral neuropathy and some of
Hmm.
that nerve type pain would be more dysautonomia type issues as well.
So I can hear the listeners asking this question right now.
Mhm.
I don't know if I have long COVID, but I have these menopause symptoms and they
Mhm.
mirror exactly what's happened with long COVID. What is the worst case if I decide to take CircuGuard? Just assuming I might have long COVID, but
Yeah.
I know I have menopause symptoms.
So one of the reasons I was willing to do this is CircuGuard's super safe. As long as you don't have a known allergy to willow bark, right? If you could take aspirin, you're fine, right?
Okay.
So as long as there's not any kind of issue like that. The other thing is so what's important about CircuGuard for long COVID is the combination of ingredients together. And none of the ingredients are in here at super high doses. For instance, there's 400 milligrams of turmeric. People take 2,500 milligrams a day of turmeric. You can go on Amazon and buy
Sure.
that size of dosing, right? So all of the ingredients are super safe. They're well below any kind of maximum tolerated dose that would cause any type of issues. All of the ingredients are. So
Okay.
the worst thing that would happen to somebody, and this is literally the worst thing for me, would be they take it and they feel nothing.
Okay.
That's pretty much your absolute worst case. Again, unless you have some kind of allergy to one of the ingredients, which most people know if they have some kind of allergy to a supplement ingredient.
Okay.
But most people, if they take it, I had one friend that took it. He had long COVID like a year ago. He got it. He took it just to see. And he came back to me and says, I didn't know I still had long COVID. He's like, all of a sudden I could think so much clearer. I just
Oh,
thought this was my new normal. Like I didn't realize I still had brain fog. And I was
yeah.
like, gee, there you go.
Yeah. If there could be any relief from menopause symptoms, I would say
Mhm,
many women would go for that brain fog right away, tackle that one
mhm.
because it impacts everything. We can move through a panic attack
Yeah,
and some hot flashes, making those critical lifestyle adjustments. But that brain fog, which could be related to progesterone because you're not sleeping well, could be related to estrogen because it's a
yeah,
neuroprotective mechanism. It could be related to testosterone. Women will experience even that low confidence and low mood. But trying a supplement that nothing ventured, nothing gained. Give it
Yeah.
a try. And if you're getting the same results, because as you said, it's at those safe levels, then why not? And I've always said to some of my clients is that it's going to be a bit of an experience or experiment, because symptoms will show up differently in everybody. We're like snowflakes. And so be willing and open to try and log it. See if you're getting those results. Giving about 90 to 120 days. And that was just right in your target
Yeah.
time frame, 3 to 4 months to give it a try. Now, if you do go on it and you're getting results, is there a time frame where you should stop? Or can you go off it completely, or just stop, give your body a chance to
Sure.
find a new normal?
So if everything, so if CircuGuard, if microclots are really what causes long COVID, and CircuGuard is helping with the microclots, then long term there should be a point where you can stop taking it, because
Okay.
really the mechanism here is CircuGuard and pharmaceutical triple anticoagulant therapy. They are stopping new microclots from forming and allowing the body to clear the microclots that are present naturally, right? So it's keeping more microclots from forming and giving the body the break to heal itself, clear the microclots that are existing, and then presumably once that happens, you would be able to come off CircuGuard or triple anticoagulant therapy and have your long COVID resolve. So that's the way. And my kind of more intuition than anything else, because I don't have any data, is that's probably towards the end of that 6-month window. If people wanted to try starting to taper off of it to see how they're doing. And again, part of that, and I hadn't talked about this, but one of the other theories that people are coming to really accept now behind long COVID is that the spike protein is likely present to be causing the microclots because of viral reservoirs somewhere in the body. The GI tract is right one of those places. The immune system is not able to completely clear the virus, so you're getting up with viral reservoirs. So at the same time that CircuGuard is helping clear the microclots, the thought is that the immune system's hopefully coming back into balance. And if you can do anything to boost it, that'd be great. To make sure you're clearing viral reservoirs. And actually, a couple of the products that I'm working on are product for the GI tract to clear viral reservoirs and to help with gut dysbiosis, and also an immune booster to work on that. Those are some of the other products I'm working on designing.
That is fantastic. I've been hearing it more often than not. For women, we're at a higher level of autoimmune disease are starting to show up in women as they hit those menopausal years, 45, 55, some older, some younger, where those things are starting to pop up. And you think, I thought I dealt with this before. But then when you go back to the viral residue from something that could have infected us in childhood, and it just goes hidden deep in the microbiome of the gut, and suddenly hormones shift, cortisol, adrenals, thyroid, and even insulin, and all of a sudden it percolates and we're left to deal with it. So tackling the gut health and immunity at the same time, I am super excited to see those products roll off.
Yep.
Keep doing what you're doing. Keep sticking to your why, Dr. Ellis, because that philosophy, that mindset is shifting the way that science is finding new discoveries and treating us. Hormone health in women is still new research. So if we can bridge the research with hormone health in women, with these other diseases, and find optimal health benefits, we're going to have, we'll be health care instead of sickness care once again.
Yes. And that's really, I think, pharmaceutical drugs have their place. When you really need a pharmaceutical drug because you're in a bad situation, you need it, right? We can't stop continuing to develop good pharmaceutical drugs for conditions. But what it seems like we need to do is remember the fact that something can help people besides pharmaceutical drugs, that there are other ways to address some of these concerns with natural ingredients.
Right. That's so wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise, your discovery. We'll get all of the links in the show notes. Tell our listeners where they can find you, Dr. Ellis.
So the best place to find me is my website. It's keithcellisphd.com. And there's links to everything there. So it's your one-stop shop. There's a link to my Substack. If you want to go check out the research on microclots and good summaries of the literature, and also the research on how I formulated the product and why it should work for microclots. There's a link to go order CircuGuard. There's a link to my TikTok and YouTube and all my social media. You can email me from there directly, and you can join my email list to see what I send out weekly to my email list.
That's fantastic. So I'll get all of that information in the show notes for our listeners. Thank you so much, Dr. Ellis, for being a part of this podcast, for shifting the way we think about treating illnesses and symptoms, including that of menopause, disrupting the narrative around science and research and hormone health. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for having me.
My biggest takeaway, and there's only one today, apart from the fact that I found it fascinating that blood tests will not reveal long COVID, which is one of the hidden struggles, or that the symptoms of long COVID mirror a lot of the symptoms in menopause, and sometimes they're overlapped and it's hard to distinguish one over the other. And that, of course, prompted me to do my episode last spring. And then the fact that it's easier and faster to create a natural product rather than go through the process of a pharmaceutical, the registration, the medical system, which often leads to better solutions because of the fact that we can use natural ingredients that Mother Earth provides for our healing journey. But all of that aside, my biggest takeaway, and we hit it right at the very beginning of this episode, start with your why. Simon Sinek, start with your why. Your why, the purpose for which you do everything. And this is a bit of an extrapolation from menopause in this episode, but it's related to everything we do in life. Our careers, what motivates us to explore, to create, to discover things, to keep doing what we're doing, be it for family, health, community, the greater good. Like Dr. Ellis said, he wants everybody just to feel good. And when you start with your why, you can identify the what. And then from there, you work with how to achieve it. For example, why menopausal women want to overcome their symptoms. Why, I ask in my coaching program. Why? Because I don't want to feel discomfort anymore. Well, why is that important to you? Because when I feel discomfort, I lack energy. I don't feel good about myself, and I'm miserable to others around me. Well, why is that important to you to change that? Because when I can feel better about myself and manage my symptoms, I don't feel discomfort. I am happy and I have more energy to give my family, more love to spread to people around me, friends, family, and to feel more self-love. When I feel more self-love, I can feel at my very core that I'm connected to something that's greater than myself, that I'm a spiritual being, I'm a creator, and I can add purpose and value to this world. The practice of starting with your why is a key component to my Menopause Intelligence digital course. And I only bring this up because it was very timely that Dr. Ellis had raised the point that Start With Your Why was his favorite book. And it reminded me why this exercise is so valuable. We can get lost in an illness. We can get lost in a condition around us, be it politics, our own personal environment, and the mind can take us to a thought process that often isn't healthy and productive. But when we get back to doing the work of Start With Your Why, we are reminded why we were here and what our soul's purpose is. If you have struggled with this, I highly recommend that you sit down, Google, YouTube, Simon Sinek, Start With Your Why. He has a little exercise where he explains the 3 circles of why, what, and how. And if you're really interested in taking your menopause journey to a whole new level, check out my Menopause Intelligence course, linked in the show notes. That is my biggest takeaway. So whether we're talking about long COVID or about heart health, exercise, neurodivergent traits, and the intersection with menopause, it's very important for you, my listeners, to connect with who you are. Why do you keep showing up every week to tune into another episode? Because your learning journey is important to you. And that's why I podcast, to create community, to disrupt the narrative and the social construct that we've come to know about menopause, the lack of support, gaslighting, dismissal from a medical system that refuses to learn and to grow as a collective whole. We only see pockets of it in our medical system willing to take their learning journey one step further. And why do they do that? Because our pain points were their pain points too. If today's insights resonated with you, I'd love for you to be part of our growing community of menopause disruptors. Hit that subscribe button wherever you're listening right now. And if you know someone who can benefit from these conversations, please share this episode. Sometimes a simple act of sharing can be the first step in someone's healing journey. And hey, if you're ready to take the next step in your menopause journey, I'm here to support you. You can find all my services, including my comprehensive menopause intelligence digital course, one-on-one coaching programs, and workplace education services at mlcoaching.com. It's in the show notes. Want to stay connected? Follow me on Instagram at Menopause Disruptor Podcast. Let's continue to disrupt this menopause conversation together. Remember, midlife should be the best life, and it will be. Namaste.